Well, hey, all you wiretappers, good to be back here in the studio of Gangland Wire. I have a little bit different sort of a story. It's part mob and part fire protection and a huge fire that was, it really hit the headlines all over the United States back in the 70s. It's Bob Webster. Bob, really appreciate you coming on the show.
I appreciate the invitation. Looking forward to it.
Now, Bob, you got a pretty good accent. You got about as good an accent as I do.
We're a
Yeah,
little bit different speaking, aren't we?
a little bit different. My New York fans and my Chicago fans,
I bet.
and my Southern fans. You got that. We got that kind of Midwest twang, I guess, if you will. Kentucky,
Yeah.
and I'm from Missouri. And Bob, my first relatives came, of course, from Virginia first, then to Kentucky, and then on to Missouri. It was
Okay.
the immigrant path back there in the 1800s, and I got a ton of them. Some of them are still down there, actually. They came here in the 1860s, just before the Civil War. They came to Missouri, but they had
Yeah.
deep roots there in Kentucky. The book is Inside the Beverly Hills Supper Club, the untold story behind Kentucky's worst tragedy. It happened in May 28th, 1977, as the supper club right along the Ohio River. And Bob is from that area, and he does a lot of local history down there. And Bob, you've got other books out there, correct?
I do. I'm working on number 8 right now. Beverly Hills is certainly the most popular, but I've
Yeah.
written books on other local history topics. I also have sort of a textbook out that covers the just a generalization of history of Northern Kentucky. Came out about 4 years ago, and just finished a historical fiction book.
Oh,
A lot of
really?
my counterparts kind of tease me for writing a partly fiction book, but it's based on a true story, so I can get by with it. But certainly, almost everything that I write is nonfiction, just the facts.
Yeah, and this is totally nonfiction,
Oh,
correct?
absolutely.
I looked at it. It
Well
is
researched
totally,
and
yeah.
everything's documented. There's endnotes for every chapter, and it's
Yeah, I
it's
could I
uh,
could tell.
verbatim.
So yeah, and I understand that writing historical fiction because you can make it more of an entertaining read, and you can tie things together that nobody knows with a little literary or poetic
True,
license, if you will,
true.
and it does make it a little more entertaining to read
Yeah,
sometimes. Broaden out your audience somewhat, which we're always
true.
trying to broaden our audience, aren't we?
And like I said, it's based on a true story here locally, one of the neighboring counties. It's interesting that I've had several people contact me and say, I know what you're really talking about. I know this. I know the real story. You're talking about.
We don't want to be sued,
So
do we?
they know the truth part of everything.
Now, what is that historical fiction about? Is it a Kentucky crime?
It's actually a murder mystery based on my own family. I mentioned off camera that my first book was a family history project, about 700 pages. So it was well in depth. But you start researching things, and almost every family runs into something that they were not aware of. I ran into a murder. And the more I read in the newspaper, I'm like, this doesn't sound like it really happened this way. This something else must be going on. So I did some research and said, this would make a really interesting book. I'd have to change some names and some facts and things, but it's called Elliston Station, and it's based on a little town in Grant County, and it's gone over real well.
Oh, well, great, great. Well, let's get back to the book at hand and back to the mafia, because the mafia had a big part in getting this started, or organized crime out of, I believe it was Cleveland, or was it Cincinnati? I
Um,
get the,
yeah, the actually Newport, Kentucky, right on the we're right across the river from Cincinnati, Ohio.
okay.
They have some gambling and illegal activity that dates all the way back before 1800. But the Volstead Act with illegal alcohol, impeachment, Jimmy Brink, Buck Brady, some of the well-known names here locally, started the bootlegging operation. But that's when the mafia really moved into the area. Originally from Detroit, they were part of the Little Jewish Navy. But Frank Milano, I pronounce it Mo Dalitz, Dalitz, came down and he formed what they called the Cleveland Four. So it was Mo and Sam Tucker and Morris Kleinman and Lou Rothkopf. And the early 1930s, mid 1930s, they moved in, pretty much took over Newport, took over part of Cincinnati, some of the other areas as well. But they really took over Northern Kentucky, and the police and everyone down in Frankfort didn't seem to pay any attention to what was going on way up here in Northern Kentucky. They just consider us part of Cincinnati, I suppose. But they moved in and basically torched a lot of the owners of the clubs back then with the same philosophy. You either sell us your club and we'll keep you on as a manager and pay you a little bit of a stipend, or you're going to be out of business. And most of the club owners took heed and sold their clubs. But there were a couple of people, Glenn Schmidt or Pete Schmidt, who owned the Glen Hotel in Newport, said no, he's not going to be bought out. Well, they burned him out too. But he moved out of town just a few miles to what is now Southgate, Kentucky, and he reopened what was a Kentucky Castle. It had been vacant for a few years, but he figured he'd let the mob have Newport, and he was going to open up his club there in Southgate. But on February 3rd, 1936, the mob burned his place down again. And it would have gone unnoticed like all the other fires that had been going on for the last 4 or 5 years. But there was a little 5-year-old girl who was the niece of the caretaker of the property, and she was killed in that fire. So there was an investigation, and several of the mobsters went to jail. Masterson, who was probably the mastermind, we think, got away scot-free. But the bottom line is he was able to rebuild the club there. He renamed it the Beverly Hills Club. Then it became the Beverly Hills Country Club. This is before the Supper Club era. But the mob didn't give up. They moved in, started harassing customers. They robbed the payroll a couple of times. They also performed what was called ding-donging. I don't know if you've heard of that, but they would send 4 or 5 of their henchmen into the lobby of this Glen Hotel, and they would just urinate on the floor. They would do that every day. And he finally said, okay, give up, and he sold the place to the mob. So by 1938 to 1942, there were over 30 illegal gambling casinos in northern Kentucky, all operated by the Cleveland Syndicate.
Yeah, that's Mo Dalitz was he was quite a mover and shaker. It's kind of interesting. He ends up being a sterling citizen, giving back to charity and everything out in Las Vegas. But those 4 guys you mentioned, those 4 Jewish guys, a Jewish cabal, if you will, maybe not the best word, but cartel that started that, they're going to end up starting Las Vegas basically, but they cut their teeth right here in this Beverly Hills Country Club, if I remember right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that what you would call a carpet joint back then? Is that what you call a carpet joint back then?
We had 2 of those, but that was the first of what we called the carpet joints. Yeah, all the other places in Newport were sawdust floors. You could get buzzed in by the bartender to go into a back room or an upstairs parlor or downstairs. I mean, it was not wide open. But the Beverly Hills Club was the first one that, I mean, you could just walk right in the door. Everyone knew it was there. Everyone knew it was illegal. There were 2 state governors that were there for opening night for the illegal gambling casino. But chandeliers, I mean, it was the place to be back then. And I mean, we're talking high-notch entertainment. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis, Marilyn Monroe, the Andrews Sisters. I mean, those were people that were frequent stars on the showroom floor there back in the day. But if you do a little research on Mo, you find out that he takes all of his illegal money that he got from northern Kentucky and went out there and you're right, became the great citizen, donating money to, I think he opened a hospital and whatever else, I don't know, but I mean they built a shrine for him out there, I suppose.
Yeah, he's a hell of a story just in himself, and I've never really looked into that story in great depth, but I should do that. He's a hell of a story himself. But back to the Beverly Hills Club, and now, who was the clientele? Were they coming mainly out of Cleveland, I guess, but also Chicago and Kansas City and all around the Midwest, a little bit like Hot Springs. It reminds me of Hot Springs.
Yeah, most of the clientele were right around this area. They did bring quite a bit down from Cleveland and Indianapolis. We're about an hour and a half away from there. Columbus, Lexington, Kentucky. So the Cincinnati area, it was a strong hub. They had a very successful airport by that time, so people could fly in. But most of the clientele were right in the greater Cincinnati area.
Okay.
But I mean, it was the only place like this in the whole mid where you would have to go to Chicago or New York to see anything like this.
By the 50s, They had a little bit of stuff like this going on in Hot Springs, a little higher class entertainment, but this was the big one from what I've read about it. It was a
And it
heck of a
was
place.
just other reasoning for that as well. Some of most of the clubs down in the city of Newport were kind of shady. Based on my research, you couldn't win at any of the games. If you were lucky enough, they were all fixed, lucky
Really?
enough to win some money. As soon as you got outside, you'd get roughed up and robbed by, one of the one of the henchmen of the club. Of course, you couldn't go to the police. They were being paid off. But at the Beverly Hills Club, the games were not fixed. You could actually win some money. The food was top notch. Like I said, the entertainment, you didn't have this kind of entertainment down in Newport. So it was a different clientele. It was coat and tie and fancy dresses, or were not going to get in.
Interesting. I know Sam Giancana tried to start something called the Venice Villa, I believe was the name of it. That was just exactly what you're describing. Then he had a big Quonset hut out and back for the gambling. So this is a kind of a common thing around the United States is
Yeah,
having that
yeah.
club with high-end dining and gambling somewhere connected to it. And the mob guys all got into it. I had an expert on here once that said that these guys that started Vegas, Dalitz and those other three guys you mentioned, which I never remember their names, but other people who went out to run the casinos at Vegas when it first got started, they all earned their chops or they learned the game and how to run the gaming business in this kind of a club like this. And that was the
Right,
next step up
right,
was out in
absolutely.
Las Vegas. So this was really the beginning of Las Vegas as we come to know it.
Yeah,
It was having
absolutely.
something like this. Interesting. So now we go on up into the 50s and 60s when Mo Dalitz sold out, I believe, and
Yeah, he
his
sold out.
football sold out.
And by the late 50s, we had some we'll call them groups of do-gooders that wanted to move in and get all the prostitution and the gambling and everything out of
Yeah.
Newport. We locally here call it the Ratterman fiasco. There was a George Ratterman was well known in the area, played football, decided he was going to run for office in Newport. And he vowed that he could not be bribed by the mafia. And I mean, he certainly was going to win. But Charles Lester, who was the mob's attorney, and Tito Carenzi, who was, I guess, wanted to take over when Mo and everyone was out of here. He wanted to be the next big kingpin. Called Ratterman with the plan. They said, "Oh, we're going to come clean. We want to meet with you and have dinner, and we'll talk about how we can straighten this stuff out and get all this crime and corruption out of Newport." And I guess maybe he fell for it, but of course he showed up and they had drugged his drink, and he wakes up in bed with one of the known prostitute call-girls or showgirls from one of the clubs, and of course the police just happened to be there with cameras, so he's all over the morning paper, all over the country. And, he said he had been drugged. And of course, a simple drug test proved that. So the mob didn't work out very well. Several people were arrested, including police officers and judges. Most of those were acquitted. There wasn't enough evidence to convict them, but several of the mobsters went to prison for that. But that really turned around Newport. I think at that time, a lot of people thought that the gambling left completely and then some of the other corruption, but of course it didn't. The New York syndicate, the DiBernardo family, moved into the area as well. They were specializing at that time in the adult theaters and peep shows and things of that nature. Newport was overrun with those. I mean, there were several in town that you could visit there. The Cinemax would have been the most popular, the longest living one. But that's sort of where the turnaround came. In 1969, Richard Schilling Sr. purchased the old Beverly Hills Club for $400,000. He had already owned the Lookout House, which was another high-end showplace restaurant, no gambling at that time when he bought it. But he was very successful in that and decided to buy the Beverly Hills. He renamed it the Beverly Hills Supper Club, $2 million in renovations. But the mob still didn't give up. They propositioned him the same way as it's always been. We're going to buy the club. We'll keep you on as manager. He said no. And June 21st, 1970, it burned to the ground. The renovations hadn't been done yet. It's funny, the electric had been turned off during this renovation time, but the local authorities, although they called it arson, The state police said that the cause was undeterminable. Well, they found large gasoline cans in the rubble. There were 4 separate fires in separate areas of the club, but the state police
Yeah.
said they couldn't figure that out. So he was basically threatened to not open the club again, but he did. It became known as the showplace of the nation. But in the 70s, the mob was still here. I researched 45 different car bombings. There were 60 unsolved murders, 40 arson or suspicious fires in nightclubs. They were still here. They were still doing the same thing that they had always been doing, and that is running these successful clubs and taking all the profits.
Interesting.
That brings us up to May 28th, 1977.
Wow. So May 28th, 1977, the club's still going, and the big show that night. Who was the headliner that night?
That was John Davidson, blue-eyed, blonde-haired singer all the women wanted to go see.
Yeah.
He was the headliner. He had been there the night before. He was there for 2 nights. He packed the place.
So they were still getting in. They continued to get in national entertainment in a little
absolutely.
northern Kentucky, out in the boonies like that. Usually don't get that kind of entertainment. We're lucky to get it here in Kansas City anymore, it seems like.
Yeah, I don't have a list in my head right now, but yeah, they certainly top notch. The comedians that you would see on TV, the singers, movie stars. John Davidson at that time was not only a good singer, he was host of a couple of different TV shows.
So he was.
That's Incredible, I think, was the name of the one show that he was hosting. But yeah, they were packing them in every weekend for sure. But they were.
What happened that night?
Time. Go ahead.
What happened that night then?
Well, we know now that there were rumors before the night that something might happen, but that particular morning, one of the busboys showed up and found people working on ladders in one of the showrooms, the smallest showroom called the Zebra Room. And he was supposed to be setting up tables and chairs in there. He asked them what they were doing. They said they were working on the air conditioning. So he went and set up chairs in some other room, but came back and they were still working on that. They basically yelled at him, but he finally got in there, was able to set some things up for a small wedding reception that would be going on. There were going to be about 2,500 people in the building that night, including staff. There were several things going on. There was a dinner party for some doctors and their wives in one area, a bar mitzvah in another area. There were 4 different weddings going on that night. The AAA from Dayton, Ohio had come down. There was a senior citizens group from Ashland, Kentucky, and Huntington, West Virginia, which is about 4 hours, 3 or 4 hours away. They brought 2 Greyhound buses full of people. The place was packed for sure.
Yeah.
And I guess it was about 10 minutes till 9 that evening, people started complaining that the building was hot, and they didn't see smoke, didn't see fire until about 9 o'clock when 2 of the waitresses walked into that Zebra Room, which was now vacant. That little wedding party had already finished up and left. They saw smoke lingering at the ceiling and immediately told the owners. And the fire department was called, and they started evacuating the building right away. What is upsetting is the later research. There were 12 different people that drove up the driveway that night before, anywhere from 6:30 to 9, and saw smoke coming out of the roof of the building and didn't say anything to anybody. They just thought it was from a chimney or from the kitchen or what have you, but they saw smoke 2 hours beforehand, and no one told the club staff or anyone. Obviously would have changed things completely. But
really?
Fire finally broke out of that room about 9:15, and it was absolutely a disaster, that's for sure.
What had it been going there above, like a drop ceiling, or up between the
Well,
floors up in there, and really, spread out above everything?
What we know now is that the fire started in the basement and it was traveled up through a void space all the way through the first floor into the ceiling of the second floor.
Okay.
And started burning down into the walls. So
yeah,
it started, we think, shortly after 6 p.m. So it wasn't until 9, a little after 9, that the fire and smoke actually made it itself visible to the club staff and patrons. It had been burning for about 3 hours inside the walls and ceilings.
Wow. So when it burst loose, it burst fast, huh?
Oh, it didn't take long. There were two different retired firefighters that were on the scene there just as guests, and they could tell how quickly the fire spread through parts of that building, that it obviously had been burning for quite some time when it found that extra oxygen that it needed to really take off.
And the main room was full, I assume, at this point in time.
Yeah, the cabaret room was built to hold 1,000. We think that there was 1,051 people in the room. So it was crowded. By legal aspects, it wasn't grossly overcrowded, but that's what is in the history books, that it was grossly overcrowded.
Yeah.
But it certainly was crowded. There were tables and chairs set up in some of the aisles. It was certainly hard to move around in there. But there was a boy that was notified pretty quickly that there was a small fire on the other side of the building. And he decided, and he tells me it seems like it took several minutes, but it only took about a minute for him to decide, hey, do I get up on this stage and make an announcement? I'm going to get fired if there's not really a fire. He didn't see a fire. He didn't see smoke or anything. So, there's a room full of people that just ordered their drinks. That's where the club makes all their money, is with the alcohol. If he clears out this room, this 16-year-old busboy is going to get fired. But after just, a minute, he decides, well, that's what I'm going to do. So he gets on the stage. He says, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have your attention. There's a small fire on the other side of the building. We want you to leave immediately. There's an exit there. And he points to the left, and exit there to the right. You can also exit through the doors that you came through. And then he jumps from the stage. On stage was the comedy duo of Teeter and McDonald. They are ventriloquist comedians. And unfortunately, about 1/3 of the people thought he was part of the show. For whatever reason, they paid no attention to him whatsoever. They later told authorities. Another third of the people didn't pay any attention to him at all. They had just sat down, they just ordered their drinks, they're talking with their friends and family. They had no idea that he even jumped up on the stage. Only about 1/3 of that 1,000 people immediately gathered their belongings and started exiting the room. Of course, they made it out without any complication whatsoever. So the fact that 169 people were killed out of that 1,000 in that room, and of course there were over 1,000 other people in the building, is pretty remarkable. But still, there are a lot of lives lost just because they didn't heed that warning.
What was the total loss of life in that?
169.
Oh, that was the total loss, was a 169. Okay. And
you'll read in various places that the number 165, but that's inaccurate. It was decided very early after the fire that unborn fetuses would be counted in the death toll. The memorial that we have now here in Northern Kentucky has a stone for all the victims, and it's 169 is what it should be accurately.
Interesting. So what was the aftermath of that? Did a big investigation? Was there, did heads roll, or what happened after that?
The aftermath was quite interesting. If you were living in this area at that time, you were pretty upset at the owners because it was determined very quickly that several of the doors had been chained and locked, that there was at least a 20-minute delay in notifying the authorities about the fire. There was no sprinkler system. The investigation within the first 6 months determined, first of all, that there's no sprinkler system that was required by law at that point in time. It was not grandfathered into the previous construction. The Associated Press was actually notified at 2 minutes before 9, and we know that the fire department was called at 4 minutes before 9, so there was no delay in notifying the authorities. The only door that was chained and locked was one that had been remodeled. You couldn't find it from the inside anyway, and to get to that door, you would have had to walk through the fire to get to the door. So no one died as a result of locked exit doors or anything like that. So it's interesting. I think that if someone would have told a reporter outside that they heard a bomb go off, they would have just printed that too. There didn't seem to be any true research in determining what to print in the newspaper. At one point, it said that there were over 5 times the number of people in the cabaret room that should have been in there. Well, we've had architects tell us that you couldn't fit 5,000 people in that room if you took out all the chairs and tables, but that's what they printed. It was so overcrowded. So there was a grand jury investigation that was put in because they were actually considering having murder charges going against the owner for all that he did not do to prevent this. And I think most of the public here was dumbfounded when they determined that there was no lack of communication with the authorities. There was no delay. There was no overcrowding. That the club staff did a remarkable job getting most of the people out in a timely manner. So that kind of failed. But it haunted some of the employees that saw some of this suspicious activity. I only brought up one thing as far as those workers. Dave Brock was the busboy. He went to the owners about 6 months after the fire, and he said, has anyone ever talked to those workers that were in the zebra room? And Mr. Schilling said, what do you mean? And Dave told him, they told me they were working on the air conditioning. And Mr. Schilling said, Dave, they've burned us down. There's no air conditioning units in the zebra room. It's just ductwork. There's nothing that they would have been working on. We got our hands on the records. There was no maintenance work that was scheduled for that week at all. So they were, should not, two minutes that should not have been there.
Yeah.
We also heard from another waitress that came early Saturday morning, that same Saturday morning, and she thought it was strange that there were 4 or 5 people doing detailed cleaning. They were wiping and cleaning the walls of the long hallway that goes from the front of the room, from the front of the building down to the cabaret room, the main showroom. She said they don't usually do detail cleaning on a Saturday morning. They would do that on a weekday morning. Well, we now know that they were likely wiping some type of accelerant on those walls because one of the firefighters that was there just as a patron was in that hallway when the fire broke out of the small zebra room. And he told authorities at that time, there's no way that fire raced down that hallway the way it did unless it had been accelerated. He was a 20-year fire captain. He knew what he was talking about. They didn't investigate that whatsoever. The club receptionist told authorities that very morning there was an explosion down in the basement. The same workers that had been there all week long saying that they were working on the electric and the air conditioning. Again, there was no work scheduled according to the owners that week. We now believe that the fire was set. We have certain evidence that shows that the basement, although the governor and the immediate investigation said that the basement wasn't damaged or touched by fire, we have photographs of fire patterns in the basement. We can see where there was an explosion in one of the air conditioning units that we feel had been set with timers. The fire marshal's division, by the way, the governor of Kentucky at that time sent them back to Frankfort, said that they were not needed. I'll repeat that. The fire marshal's division that came up to investigate, the governor sent them back to Frankfort and said that the state police would handle the investigation. Well, before they were sent back to Frankfort, they, in their report, said that the basement would be their main area of focus. They had already found timers in the rubble, but some were set on AM and some were set on PM. It's our belief that the fire was set and it was supposed to start at 6 o'clock Sunday morning.
Yeah, that's how they always do it. Every bar fire we've ever had, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock Sunday morning.
Same here. Newport, I mentioned earlier that the dozens of club fires that we had in Newport, they were always Sunday. So that's what we think. In my investigation, we even determined, in my opinion, the 2 people that actually set the fire, I named them in the book, they were not very good at what they did. Obviously the AM, PM timers, but several months after the Beverly Hills fire, they were hired to torch a warehouse in Covington for the insurance money for the owner. And they set the fire and went outside and stood around to watch and nothing happened. So one of them went over and opened the front door and the place exploded and they found their bodies down the street. But they just were not very good at what they did.
Man, talk about
we don't think
license.
We thought there's no way that the mob intended to kill 169 people. We feel it was most likely set to go off Sunday morning.
Interesting. Well, I'll tell you what, Bob Webster, this has been great. That's a heck of a story. Guys, there's a lot more juicy details in that book. I highly recommend you get it. Inside the Beverly Hills Supper Club, the untold story behind Kentucky's worst tragedy happened in May 28th, 1977, practically on the banks of the Ohio River, in an area that is long noted for lawlessness all along that Ohio River on the southern bank. It's
Yeah,
long been noted for lawlessness and mob activity and all other kinds of criminal activity. So, Bob, I really appreciate you coming on the show and telling the guys all about your book.
absolutely.
Now, Bob, you got a website, don't you? What's your website?
The website is very, very simple. My name is Bob and I'm an author. The website is bobtheauthor.com.
All right, great. Guys, I'll have a link to that website down below. You can see all about Bob and a lot more about the fire and his research and other books that he's got.